So today is Epiphany Sunday in our liturgical tradition, and that word epiphany gets thrown around a lot in our culture, like, oh, I've had an epiphany, and like somebody found a new good dishwashing detergent or something. And it's actually way more significant than that. Epiphanies are things that like entirely shift our orientation towards ourselves, towards others, towards God. And the thing about epiphanies is that we don't create them, they happen to us. Okay, so in the stories we just read, the wise men see a star, they're out in the wilderness, and they go on this journey into the unknown. In the second story we heard, there's this older woman who's been in the temple, who's been in the church her whole life, and this child comes and she has an epiphany. So what I want you to pull away from those two stories is epiphanies can happen out in the wild, and epiphanies can happen in the sanctuary. They can happen anywhere at any time to anyone. And so as a way of making that message even more clear, we're going to hear from 5 of our very own beloved members of Koinonia about their experience with Epiphany.
This is cool that I can talk with my hands, which I normally do. I like that last thing that EJ said about making it more clear. I probably am going to make it as incredibly unclear as humanly possible, so sort of bear with me here. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to give my most humble thanks to Tom Ott and EJ and Tom Ryberg. Every week I leave here feeling challenged and charged and renewed and basically kicked in the spiritual pants by their words. And in preparing to speak today, I realized that this is very hard. It's very difficult to come up with something meaningful to say to a group of people. Now I'm even more impressed with their ability to craft such amazing sermons. So thank you very much. I hope my own ramblings can kind of shed some light here a little bit on our theme for today, so I will do my best. If you have any questions, though, you should really direct them to TR, and he's busy working on his tan in the Caribbean, so he'll be back in a week or so you can catch up with him when he comes back. So Emily asked if I wouldn't mind speaking about Epiphany, and she suggested that it might be nice if it could relay something spiritual in nature, or could offer some key insight, perhaps, revolve around a life-changing event. So at first, I really had no idea. Nothing really sprung to mind. And have I ever really had an epiphany? It seems like a really, really big word to sort of put to my little, thoughts and ideas and things. So after a bit of thinking, I did figure out 2 things. One, that I'm not really sure how to define epiphany. And 2, had I ever really had and truly experienced epiphany in my life? So I set forth thinking about my definition of epiphany. So my gut reaction is big, life-changing event. Something that smacks you in the head, wakes you up, causes a real change in your life. A moment of clarity, a light bulb over your head, an idea that sends you into the world to want to change it. How many of you have had that type of epiphany in your life? I mean, I'm talking like vision of Jesus blinding Paul, knocking him off his horse, miraculous, supernatural, otherwise revelatory in nature. Have you ever had that kind of epiphany? I'm glad for you, and I am envious of you, because I don't feel that way. I don't look at epiphany like that. I don't feel like that type of thing has happened in my life. So the Bible is chock full of stories about people gaining insight and spiritual wisdom getting smacked on the head, angels appearing as the manifestation of God and throwing down some life-changing stuff. Hey, there's a flood coming. You should probably build a boat, get some animals, I know you're not married, but your special lady friend is pregnant, so if you could kind of, the bush is burning, pay attention. I need you to lead some people into Egypt. Big epiphanies. So based on the Alexandrian calendar, ancient Christians celebrated Epiphany on the winter solstice, literally marking the end of darker days and the beginning of brighter ones. Now, I like that. I can sort of grab onto that. I think it sort of starts to sum it up. Epiphany as an event that pulls you out of darkness and brings you into the light. Okay. So that was getting a little closer. That's got to be it, I would think. Epiphany. Maybe. Maybe for some of you. Still not quite for me, though. See, it's right in this spot that I start to struggle. This definition, trying to figure it out, thinking and assuming and slightly misinterpreting the definition, maybe. I mean, I have had all that big stuff, and all those life-changing events are part of it, but there's more. See, what I finally figured out for me was that it's more about gaining the insight after the life-changing event than some clunk on the noggin that led me to the event. Wow, okay. Maybe I can figure this out. And believe me, I've had some life-changing events. And on the advice of Tom Ryberg, he said, ask your wife. She'll tell you. And he was absolutely right. I have had some big ones. It kind of began when I started creeping up on 30. See, I kind of zigged and zagged for a couple years. You know, I went to school a little bit. I played in some bands. I worked. It was all fine, but it was approaching that birthday that made me realize that I might need to kind of get it together a little bit. So you might call that an epiphany of sorts. But see, still not really. Not for me. It doesn't feel like that. And that's where it's tricky. It's always sort of been like that for me. Major, big life decisions, they just kind of happen. I just sort of go into them with like, hey, this will work, I guess. So at that point, I went back to school, started a teaching career. I met Nikki. I had weight loss surgery. I lost 200 pounds. I moved to Battle Creek. I got married to Nikki. We bought a house. We had 2 unbelievably amazing little boys. Sorry. So it's all these things, these sort of life-changing events that give me insight into myself. Little epiphanies that sort of guide me through my life and hopefully make me a better person and a better Christian. They make me realize that I'm grateful and blessed to have an education and a career, that I love and adore my wife, that I feel healthier and happier after losing weight, that I'm so thankful to have found this church and this community, and that our boys make me want to be the best example of a kind and caring and loving man that I can possibly be. So, I guess that's Epiphany to me. I hope I've come a little closer to defining it and seeing it in my life. As with most things, I'm still kind of figuring it out, and it's always going to be a work in progress. I finally realized that Epiphany does not necessarily always cause the events in my life. It allows me the ability to reflect on those events and grow and learn and live from them. So, thank you.
Good morning. So, I'm really glad Emily Joy gave me a lot of notice before I had to come up here today. It didn't help me write my paper here any earlier than the day before I had to talk, but I do need lots of think time before putting thoughts on paper, so that helped. I didn't start by looking up the definition of epiphany because I thought I knew what it meant. By the time I was done with all of my thinking, then I looked up the definition. And I've learned that sometimes we use words in a certain way without really understanding what their real meaning is. So I found a couple of different definitions. In a biblical sense, epiphany means the manifestation of Christ. Never heard that before. Our secular, the most common one I think that we're aware of is a comprehension or a perception of reality by means of sudden intuitive realization. So in other words, we have a sudden intuition, we realize something big, and bam, we call it an epiphany. Epiphany is a fun word to say, interesting to spell. Hopefully by the time I'm done writing this, I'll remember how to spell it. And of course, it's fun to share your moments of epiphany with others. I like hearing about epiphany. It gives you great insight into what defines a person when you listen to the events that lead them to a change in the way they see things. On the Myers-Briggs personality test, I'm a somewhat rare INFP. Only 4% of the population is made up of people who tick the way I do. The N in INFP stands for intuitive, so by the very nature of my personality, I have epiphany all the time. So often, in fact, that sometimes by the time I get in my car, I forgot what it was. Yeah, that happens to me. So I like to try and share two epiphanies with you. One that's kind of easy and fun, and then another that's maybe not so great. It ends good, but it's difficult to talk about. All right, so I like to tell people that a hedgehog and an earthquake brought me and Simon together. You can ask me about the hedgehog later. For now, I'll fill you in on the earthquake. As many of you know, Simon is from New Zealand, and we met online just over 6 years ago. That's right, he packed up his entire life and shipped himself away from paradise here to Battle Creek to join us in the snowpocalypse, just to marry me. And after 2 years of telephone conversations, email, and online chat sessions, there were thousands, maybe even millions of words between us before we were allowed to hold hands and be present in the same physical space together for longer than 2 weeks at a time. So how did we go from words and emails and 10 question games to being in love? Well, it took an earthquake to make me realize how much I cared for Simon. One day, Simon interrupted an email to me with those very words written in parentheses. These very words written in parentheses. Ooh, just had an earthquake. A short, sharp jolt into a gentle shaking and rolling out gently. To Simon, that earthquake was no big deal. It was so insignificant that he took the time to complete an email while the windows shook. As I now know, earthquakes happen in New Zealand all the time. However, this Michigander was under the impression that all earthquakes are earth-shattering monstrosities which cause death and bridge collapses everywhere you turn. It didn't help that CNN did a story on the earthquake and posted pictures of the destruction. Entire shelving units in a library somewhere fell over. Oh my God, is he okay? Did he get hurt? Is he lying under a pile of cinder blocks somewhere? It didn't even occur to me that by the time he was done typing the email, the earthquake was over. They only last a few seconds. So, of course, I sent an email back immediately with these words. Are you okay? I saw pictures. New Zealand is not that big, so I'm sure no matter where you were, you felt it. See? All the more reason to move here to Michigan. We don't have earthquakes at all. I was already inviting him to move here after only 6 days of delayed instant messaging. At the time, we laughed about my reaction to the earthquake and Simon's reaction to my concern. There was blushing involved. We covered up our feelings with humor because it was too early, too impossible, and too crazy to be in love with someone so quickly through a computer screen. It took us over a year to realize that it was that day, that impossibly early day on December 21st in 2007, that we both fell in love with each other. The earth moved and we fell. What an epiphany. So sharing epiphany is exciting, but it can make you vulnerable. See, my story about the earthquake is sweet and heartwarming. Come on, I know some of you are sitting there going, oh, that's so sweet in your chairs. The earthquake story is easy for me to share with anyone, even perfect strangers. Everyone loves a good love story. And because that particular epiphany starts and ends happily, there is no risk in sharing it. I don't have to tell you some awful, embarrassing thing I used to believe or do, or some terrible way I used to think, and the reasons I changed when I talk about earthquakes. My love epiphany is nothing like the one I experienced 3 years ago while taking a graduate class with the very first African-American professor I'd ever seen at GBSU. That summer, I had an epiphany about race in her Cultural Foundations and Education class. that completely changed the way I think and teach. It changed the way I see my students, the way I see myself, and it left me clawing for more understanding about white privilege, though at the time I didn't even know what white privilege was. When I graduated in 2002 with a degree in psychology and a minor in education, I was ready to take on the world like all the other young graduates. I was hoping for a job in the inner city. I was hoping for a classroom filled with brown bodies, children not born with the same privilege as me. I was ready to help them and to shape them and to mold them. I would make them love learning, and I was going to make a difference if I had to die trying. I had this great plan. My students' differences were not important to me. I would not be thinking of them in terms of their race. My students would be equal in my classroom. Even better, they would all be the same. Their color didn't matter to me. If you asked me what color they were, I'd make sure to not know. My students would love me for this. They would love knowing how important they were to me and how much I didn't care what color they were. I hope you can imagine my shock the first day I heard it. The first day I heard a kid call me a racist. You gave Johnny a pass to the bathroom, but not me. Well, that's because you're a racist, Miss Mineharty. At first, I just brushed it off. Shaniqua was simply angry she didn't get what she wanted. Besides, she knows better than to ask for a pass in the first 15 minutes of the hour. It's not allowed. But I couldn't keep brushing it off. It hurt every time those words were uttered in my presence. That hurt eventually led to resentment. How dare those kids play the race card on me when I was there to help them? I was baffled that any of my students could think for even a second that I was a racist. How could I be a racist when I didn't even know what color they were? Thank God I've grown since the days of my colorblind classroom. Some of the changes happen naturally, simple automatic adjustments and minor understandings that came with more and more exposure to a culture I'd never seen before. My students knew I cared about them, and it was noted in my teacher observations. However, I imagine I was just another well-meaning white lady to some of them. It was writing that dreaded annotated bibliography, major research paper from my class that really opened my eyes for the first time. I wrote about the disproportionate number of black boys who are suspended and expelled from local school districts and what some people call the school to prison pipeline. I learned about the difference in communication styles between black and white people. I learned about African American child rearing, generational trauma, and the unintentional bias in the classroom committed by white teachers in black schools all across America. I learned that because of who I was and where I came from, it was impossible to be colorblind. I also learned that racial colorblindness is really just a poor attempt on the part of white people to treat black people as if they are white. It assumes that white is not a color. And when you assume that white is not a color, you are saying that everything white is normal and everything brown is not. Now that is an epiphany. My students' world are not colorblind, and by trying to make it that way in my classroom, I was literally ignoring who they were. When is the last time you felt respected or appreciated by someone who acted like knowing you was unimportant? And when is the last time you felt someone cared about you after they made no attempt to understand you? It never happened to me. My students deserve to be celebrated and noticed and recognized for who they are, including their blackness, and not just during Black History Month. They must have felt ignored and unimportant and confused by all those mixed messages I sent. I care about you. I love you. I hope and dream for you. What color were you again? What about your black experience? Oh, we don't talk about that in here because everybody is the same as me. So, how do I take this secular definition of epiphany in my experience and turn it into the manifestation of God, which is what Epiphany is really about? I see and feel the manifestation of God every time I learn more truth and experience and more love in my life. There is a great deal of truth and love in my story about colorblind teaching. Colorblind teaching and colorblind living is blind teaching and blind living. By rejecting the concept, I've grown deeper in my love and appreciation of all children and people in the world. and I have to learn to question the system in which I was raised, and that there is some hard work to be done to ensure my actions do not harm the very children I strive to help. And that is a beautiful manifestation of God, a beautiful epiphany, even if, and probably because, the journey is embarrassing and painful.
Okay, first of all, I'm like really nervous, and sorry for my lateness earlier. um, so like, I guess my definition of epiphany would be like reflecting on past events that's happened to me throughout my life and throughout years of growing up. So there were like 4 key life-changing, altering moments in my life. Some were very traumatic and tragic, and like it's sad that I can't remember a single happy childhood memory. Like I just focus on the negative, and so I'm gonna start with the first one. Happened when I was about 4 years old. Hit by a car, drunk driver, playing with some friends across the street. Partial brain injury. That was hard for me. Second, grandfather died when I was 9 years old. I was really close to him. Didn't know much about his culture, him being from Africa, and I always loved how he talked French and spoke all these different languages. Third, I lost someone really, really close to me, who I thought was my friend, but felt hurt and betrayed. I guess I have 5 now. Fourth, high school. I had some really great experiences in high school, some not so great, some filled with bullying, abuse, violence, me trying to figure out who I am as a person, not knowing my orientation, not knowing who I was, like, as gender identified. Fifth is when I first came out to my family. That was very, very traumatic, because I used to be really close with my mother and other people in my family, and now everything's just different. Everything's been different since my grandfather died, but now it's like worse. Like, cause since I came out, like, no, like most of my family that I used to talk to don't even want to associate with me anymore, and basically don't want anything to do with my lifestyle at all. My family is like more out of sight, out of mind. You know, don't talk about it, don't speak about it. It's your life, just do whatever. And that kind of hurts me a bit. Like, the fear of acceptance is still a struggle with me. Like, I still struggle, like, as an African American male and as a gay male. I feel so much pressure in society. So like, I can't even do that, but I had a lot of great experiences too, and that's kind of what I want to focus on. Like, my big life-changing moment was when I started working at Vanderbilt Zoo when I was about 14. Like, I loved volunteering there. Spent like my first 2 years there, and then I got involved with the DNR and then Humane Society, and then big moment was when I moved to Richmond, Virginia, which was very beautiful, very nice. And I just heard it was like 75 degrees down there right now, so I wish I was there. I don't even know why I came back to Michigan, but and that's when I finally made my life, made my career path. Like, a career I always wanted was work with animals and work with nature. So I got involved with the local Humane Society and met all these different important people and dignitaries, and got my certification in behavioral and dog training, and became a groomer, became agility and AKC, UKC, Humane Society. I got involved with all this different work that I love doing, and that's what I focus on. I focus on my work, and I focus on the love it brings me. So my biggest epiphany would be, no matter how much that I went through, no matter the trouble, the struggles that I've gone through, I still am made a better person. let's see what else I was going to say. I'm sorry, it's just mind boggling. Like, I never, like, the shit I went through, I never should have gone through. And it still hurts me and traumatizes me today. Like I sometimes often wonder, like, why am I even here? Why am I still alive? It's just like, I should have been dead, like, many times over. Like, can't tell you how many times I cheated death. It's like, and yeah, I'm still alive. I'm still here. So I often wonder or pray to God, like, what purpose does he have for me? Like, what sort of calling do I have? It's like, why am I still here? Like, what is my purpose in life? What am I meant to do? And I guess that's one of the things I struggle with and still trying to figure out.
Hi. The issue is not the issue. That has nothing to do with my speech, but with Tom on a boat in the middle of a lake, I can say whatever I want in his absence, What's he gonna do, jump off the boat and come get me? Thank you for inviting me. For my eyes have seen your salvation. In the 6th grade, as a student at Bluffton Elementary School, I entered the inaugural Bluffton Science Fair. The competition was fierce. Jeff Soniga, Pam Vandenberg, Paul Fry, Linda Haas, and Andy Hagedis, to name a few. Some of the most cerebral 6th graders ever to walk the planet, or at least at Bluffton in the 70s. I demonstrated the difference in density between warm air and cold air, and how it affected climate and created lake effect snow in our town of Muskegon, Michigan, and I won the science fair. Then in junior high, for the science fair, I created a working model of the human heart that pumped blood and demonstrated how oxygenated blood moved to and from the heart and nourished the body. I also demonstrated the effects of smoking to show that smoking was bad for the heart. On a bench top, I crudely illustrated coronary heart disease. I won the science fair. My passion for science led me to MSU, where I studied food science and human nutrition as an undergrad and graduate student. And I've dedicated the last 20 years in research and development in the science of food. Yes, I'm a geek, a nerd. Science is very clear to me and has always been a natural fit. For my eyes need to prove things before I believe they are real. For my eyes need to see. I start with a question and try and reach a justified conclusion founded on logic and evidence-based applied reason. Roll a ball across this floor and it will roll on a plane until gravity and friction slow it down, or its path is altered by an opposing force. Science. Drop the same ball in this room and acceleration due to gravity will be 9.8 meters per second squared. Science. Toast a piece of bread right here and witness a 12-step chemical reaction that takes both protein and sugar and creates a reaction that is pleasing to our palate. Science. Take this cup of water, and by lowering the temperature to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, we can slow the water molecules down to where they form a beautiful lattice structure called ice. Science. I think we got there. I think it's pretty frozen. Every time, science. Under that lens, there's always been an inner turmoil where I could not explain God. I felt God, but I could not explain. I could not set up the experiment. It tore me up for years as I went deeper into the science side. Our friends at Wikipedia put it this way: science acknowledges reason, empiricism, and evidence, while religion includes revelation, faith, and sacredness. Evidence. Yes, evidence. A spiritual epiphany would be nice. How could I prove to myself and others the notion of revelation, faith, and sacredness? I exhibited weather pattern on a bench top in the 6th grade. I demonstrated a working cardiovascular system in junior high. I can toast bread and freeze water with the best of them. But it was tough for me to duplicate God in the lab. Dictionary.com describes an epiphany as a sudden, intuitive perception into the reality or essential meaning of something, usually initiated by some simple or commonplace occurrence or experience. for my eyes have seen your salvation. 3 not so sudden, not so commonplace experiences where I've witnessed in a spiritual epiphany were on February 20th, 1995, October 22, 2000, and March 27th, 2002. The absolute miracle of life, with heavy emphasis on miracle. Glory to God in the highest heaven. Allison, Daniel, and Jonathan, when each of them entered the world and took their first breath, my first thought was this: we had help. And I cannot explain it scientifically, on a chalkboard, or with data. I cannot measure what faith can do in our darkest hour, when deep calls to deep. We had a divine help, and the scientist in me just took a seat in utter amazement at the glory of God, the glory of life, and the glory of love. I cannot prove love, but I can prove love exists, and I can prove love flourishes in the presence of faith and the commitment to God. Look around. There's your proof. And one of my favorite professors recently made the following observation, and it hit me. We've fallen in love with each other. We've got enough folks here, we've been showing up long enough that we truly have fallen in love. And we are willing to do what it takes to make love known and felt and seen and heard. Not just in this sanctuary on Sundays, but providing assistance when one of us is in need. In Luke chapter 2, verse 38, as soon as Anna saw Jesus, we read the following. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and continued to speak of God to all those who were looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. Science is science, and faith is faith. Mountains of literature exist for both, and I doubt we have the time to delineate everything, yet proof abounds for both. For my life that I cannot clarify, for love that I cannot explain, and for the miracle of life and love that has been given to my family and that is bigger than me. I give thanks to God, and I speak of God to all those who are looking, for my eyes have seen your salvation.